The Hinterkaifeck family massacre is one of those mysteries that's a part of the cornerstones of most of us true crime junkies' obsession with unsolved cases, like the Black Dahlia, JonBenet Ramsey, and Maura Murray. It's just one of many bizarre cases that awaken my itch for true crime. It's unusual, spooky, and deliciously mysterious. If you, like us here at Evidence Obscured, can't resist a good old scary crime story, then you've come to the right place. Here, we leave no stone unturned, no matter how grisly, no matter how unsolvable, and we definitely don't avoid the cases that border on the downright supernatural. Subscribe, and let's get into it. This is Germany's strangest unsolved case, the Hinterkaifeck family massacre. Let's rewind to the 4th of April 1922, to a lonely little farm outside the town of Weidhofen in Germany, where 3 townspeople discovered the bodies of all 5 members of the Gruber family and their maid, all horrifically bludgeoned to death with a gardening hoe. The sheer brutality with which the children and adults were killed were like nothing anyone in the vicinity had ever had to deal with before. But it's the odd happenings that border on the paranormal and the strange steps that the killer took after the murders that's even more disturbing than the killings themselves. This sicko lived with the corpses for days after he killed them, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's lock into the family's final known days and the events that led to the discovery first. Hinterkaifeck Farm belonged to 63-year-old Andres Gruber and his 72-year-old wife Cecilia. Their only daughter, 35-year-old Victoria, had moved back in with them after her husband died in World War I. She already had a daughter, also named Cecilia, but she later had another child, Joseph. Little Cecilia and Joseph were 7 and 2 years old at the time the murders occurred. When Joseph was born, a man by the name of Lorenz Schlittenbauer admitted to having a brief affair with Victoria, but he was adamant that the boy was not his son. Instead, he suggested that Victoria and her father had an incestuous relationship. This was such a big deal that it actually went to trial, resulting in Andres serving 1 year in prison and Victoria serving 6 months behind bars. Lorenz recanted his claims, accepted that Joseph was his son, and the father and daughter were both released from prison. It's hard to say which party was telling the truth, or if Lorenz was willing to destroy a family reputation so that he wouldn't have to take responsibility for his child, especially since he was already married with kids, or if his claims were in fact true. Regardless of the courts clearing the Grubers, the family weren't exactly the most well-liked in the area, so the town folk absolutely ate the gossip up. The Grubers weren't mean or criminal, they were just a bit, well, odd. They were extremely hardworking, but not very sociable, preferring to keep to themselves. Their former maid, Karenz Rieger, confirmed that the family were odd folk, but they'd always treated her well and that she'd never witnessed any unusually close interactions between father and daughter. They were, however, sitting on quite a bit of cash that they'd hidden in the house. They weren't exactly wealthy, but they were so stingy that they almost never spent a dime of what they'd earned. In the months leading up to the murders, Karenz reported that Andres found footprints that came out of the forest and led into the barn. The intruder forcefully broke open the door, but didn't steal anything, and Andres could not find any footprints leading out of the barn. He searched the place thoroughly, but didn't find anyone. They also found a magazine out of Munich in the front yard. It might not sound like a big deal to us, but back then it was. Subscriptions to magazines cost money and were not shared freely. Andres assumed that the mailman accidentally dropped it when he delivered mail, but the mailman assured him that he'd never delivered that magazine to anyone in the vicinity. Karenz also said that the house's master key had gone missing and that they'd turned the place upside down looking for it, but they never did find it. Karenz quit her job just a week before the murders, convinced that the farm was haunted. She'd heard noises coming from the attic for a week, but no matter how many times Andres searched it, he never found anyone or any critters up there. Corinne's bedroom door would open at exactly midnight every night, but no one was ever at the door or in the hallway. Sure that there was a poltergeist at the house, she resigned and took her newborn daughter back to town where it was safer. 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner took the position on March the 31st. Maria's sister took her to the farm and bade her goodbye at the front door. This interaction would be the last that anyone saw Maria or the Gruber family alive. On April the 1st, then began to notice that the farm was unusually quiet. He didn't hear the dog or any machinery in the distance like he usually did. The next day, the family failed to show up to church, and on Monday, little Cecilia didn't show up for her school. The postman and hunters passing by noticed that the chimney was not expelling smoke like it usually did. Some coffee salesmen came by, but no one answered the door, and they noticed that the repair room door that was attached to the barn was standing open. And another mailman saw that the outside oven was lit, so somebody was there cooking a meal after all, it seems. On April the 4th, that Tuesday, a mechanic arrived to repair a machine that Andre scheduled 2 weeks prior. No one was there, so he found the door to the engineer room, which he reported was closed, the opposite of what the coffee salesman saw, and repaired the engine he'd been sent to fix. He was on the grounds for 4 hours before he left. In that time, he never saw anyone, but he did hear the cows in the barn baying. He knew that the family was a bit odd, so he decided that they must be out and that he'd leave the issue of the bill over to his boss. Lorenz, the maybe father to Victoria's son, heard about the farm being quiet from the mechanic, and he became concerned. That's kind of why I think he probably was Yosef's real father. If he wasn't the dad, he wouldn't have cared enough to send his own 16 and 9-year-old sons over to check in with the family. The boys returned, reporting that no one was there, but that the cattle were screaming hysterically in the barn. So Lorenz and 2 of his friends, Michael Pell and Jacob Siegel, went over to investigate. And that's when they found the first body. Andres' foot was sticking out from underneath a pile of hay. Next to Andres was his wife Cecilia, his daughter Victoria, and 7-year-old Cecilia. Lorenz then took out a key from his pocket, unlocked the house, and searched inside. That's where he found his baby son, still inside his stroller, with his skull crushed by a single blow to the head. The new maid, Maria, was lying next to her bed, her body covered in a duvet. Police conducted the autopsies right there in the barn, because this was 1922, and I guess procedures weren't all that important to keep the evidence from collecting cow manure. Andres was hit so many times that it was impossible to discern how many blows he'd received. His skull was crushed, and his cheekbones were visible through his injuries. Matriarch Cecilia was hit 7 times over the head, and the physician determined that she'd been throttled at one point. Little Cecilia had been struck several times, enough to destroy her jaw and skull, but she'd managed to cling on to life for hours after the attack. There was a large cut on her neck, right below her chin, that she tried to grab onto to stop the bleeding. Shock, pain, and involuntary responses caused her to pull out her own hair while she lay there dying. Victoria had received 9 blows, mostly to the right side of her face, and Maria received similar wounds. The main weapon was most likely a garden hoe, but Victoria's injury showed a circular shape that was inconsistent with a hoe. Unfortunately, on a farm, there were a dozen different tools that could have been used, so it's hard to say which one it was. The entrance to the barn was extremely narrow, meaning that only one person at a time could go from the house, down the narrow hallway, and into the barn. So, most likely, they were lured there one by one. Each time a new person entered the barn, they were killed before the next one would be coaxed there, only to also be bludgeoned to death too. That's an extremely odd series of events, since the people inside the home would have had to have heard the struggle, screams, and blows. Yet, They apparently all walked into that massacre willingly, because that's the only place that showed any signs of a struggle. They were killed inside that barn throughout the same night, but at different times. When the killer had murdered the first four, he went into the house, killed Maria in her bed, and then baby Yosef suffered the same fate inside his stroller. The murderer then went ahead, hid the family under the hay, covered the baby and the maid in blankets, and even placed clothes on Maria's windowsill to obscure the room if anyone looked in from outside. He cooked himself a few meals, slept in the master bedroom, and got up to feed the animals. He stayed long enough to eat all of the bread, cut himself a generous amount off the cured meats in the pantry, and didn't touch the money or valuables in the drawers. By the time Munich police came to inspect the scene a week later, the place had been crawling with ungloved townsfolk, policemen, and they'd even made meals for the investigators in the kitchen. They hadn't taken any fingerprints, and they did such a terrible job of searching the place that they hadn't realized that the murder weapon was hidden in the attic. Carl Gabriel, Victoria's late husband, was looked into because the gossips theorized that he never died in battle, and when he returned to find that his wife had had another man's baby, he killed her and the entire family for the betrayal. But Carl was well and truly dead. That much was proven. Then there's Lorenz, who, even with all of the bad blood between him and the Grubers, somehow had a key to their house. He maintained that he was given the key years ago because he was a close neighbor, and most neighbors did share keys so that they could jump in the event of an emergency. I find that odd too. I can't see how Andres would allow the man that accused him of having an incestuous affair with his own daughter into his house. Maybe Lorenz wanted the whole sordid mess behind him, or Victoria was demanding child support money, or they had a lover's spat. But as suspicious as the key was, and the fact that he was the one to discover the bodies, there wasn't any physical evidence to tie him to the murders. The reason that I doubt Lorenz as the killer is that someone was snooping around the house a whole month before the murders, and I don't think Lorenz could have done it without his family and friends noticing his absences. He was definitely accounted for on the 4 days that the killer made himself at home on the farm. The next suspect was Anton Biegler. Alright, so the first maid, Karenz, received a marriage proposal from him a few months before. The Grubers advised her against the proposal because Biegler was a bit of a sleazeball who'd stolen chickens from them and other tools and livestock from the surrounding farmers. He visited Karenz a few times by knocking on her window, so he definitely knew the layout of the farm, but she firmly told him to go kick rocks. Biegler told people that the Grubers were to blame for Karenz not wanting to marry him, and that all of them should be killed for interfering. Then Karenz had another story to tell about a pair of brothers, Yosef and Andres Thaler. They tried to get information on the family by questioning her about them. They were accompanied by a stranger that she didn't recognize, and they wanted to know if the family really had as much money as the gossip said they did. The brothers were petty thieves with no serious violent backgrounds, and no one else reported seeing a stranger with them during that time. So none of this could be tied to the murders either. And the final man that was looked into was Michael Mueller, a suspected serial killer in the US. He was originally from Bavaria, but spent much of his adult life in the United States, committing crimes that were eerily similar to the Hinterkaifeck massacre. But honestly, there isn't any evidence to suggest that he was in Germany at the time of the murders, so it's highly unlikely that Mueller had anything to do with it. In 2007, the case was looked at again, and it was confirmed that they had a main suspect, but that he was not going to be publicly named out of respect for his living descendants, nor any details of what evidence there was to tie that individual to the scene. The way that the statement was formulated made me think that it was either Biegler or Lorenz, because they were both long dead but had living descendants. I'm leaning more towards Biegler though, because it was never pushed to have baby Yosef's DNA tested against Lorenz's living children or grandchildren. If it was Lorenz, then the motive would have been the child born out of wedlock and all the drama that came from that. So confirming that Victoria and Lorenz indeed had an affair, or at the very least, to clear the Gruber's name after the most hideous accusations that they were a family of incest, well, that would be the obvious reasons to test the DNA. But that was never done. That leaves me to come to the conclusion that police believe it was Beekler or some other fellow whose identity managed to stay hidden from the public. But let's be honest, this is almost certainly going to be one of those mysteries that'll haunt the sleuth sites forever. I don't see it getting a major breakthrough after all this time, do you? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one, people. Cheers.